Hey Alice, thanks for joining us this evening. I have a very special guest with me tonight. I have David Nima. Thanks for being here.
Hey, good to be here.
David hosts the Contemporary Happiness podcast. I'll put a link to that down below. And he also published another book. He's written a few, but he just published his most recent one, Good Problems to Have, The Anatomy of Contemporary Happiness. So
That's right.
I think you got that there behind you too. I like your setup.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being here, David.
Yeah.
I've seen some of your content and I thought this would be a good discussion. We talk about some similar things. We kind of get a little esoteric and like big question stuff, and I'm interested to pick your brains about a lot of that. So
yeah, ask me anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start out. What is happiness?
Okay, so that's like kind of like the most philosophical, abstract question, but I have a very simple answer for it. Now, in fact, I just recently did a video on Tony Robbins, and he, in the podcast, mentioned the definition of happiness. And his definition of happiness is progress. Just kind of when you feel that you're progressing in life, then that will bring more happiness to your life. But I think I have a better definition for happiness, which is the absence of stress. So, yeah, I think that basically there's a lot of potential negative stimuli in our lives, whether it's through, my philosophy is to discuss happiness through the lens of diet, exercise, and mindset. And everything pretty much falls into one of those buckets. And, sometimes what you eat can certainly affect your mood in a negative way or in a positive way. And of course, we know that exercise can be very correlated to our happiness and our well-being. And then most importantly is mindset. And then, that's kind of my goal here, to help people kind of have a shift in mindset, especially when it comes to their problems, which is kind of chapter 1 of the book, and to give you a fresh perspective on your problems, and just to help you not be stressed when it comes to aging, when it comes to wealth, when it comes to love and relationships, when it comes to getting a flat tire or getting fired from a job, or a whole slew of other problems that you might face throughout your life. And I think if you have the right perspective on your problems, you can certainly reduce stress.
Got it. So even when you're facing adversity, you can do it with a smile, and that's you're not letting that stress affect your happiness.
Absolutely. I think that the more that you can eliminate stress in your life, the happier you can be.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. There's when you first started that sentence, or not that sentence, but when you first started that answer, I didn't understand what you meant at first, because first you brought up the other example, or the other way of looking at happiness, which is about struggle. Progress, not struggle. Yeah, that's a key difference. And then I understand what you're saying though about removing stress. So you're not saying not to progress in something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Difficult. Got it.
Yeah, I think progress is natural. I think we're naturally progressing in life. And I think Tony Robbins' definition is maybe a little bit more work related, so that you can feel that you're progressing in life. And that, I think that's relevant in some cases, but I think a broader definition of it, or a simpler definition, is just simply remove stress. Happiness is not this abstract unattainable, destination or feeling that everyone's trying to chase at all times. Anything that you can do to remove stress from your life or to feel less stress. Of course, one of the main theses of my book and my philosophy is that problems bring us stress. And that's very much true. Like, for example, like I said, you have a leaking roof, you have a flat tire, whatever, let's just say you have bigger problems, like you have financial problems, like, let's say you got injured yesterday. So there's a lot of problems that you can have, and they all have their own different magnitude, and I think they're all very important to you personally. But when you have the right perspective on your problems, I think that's a tremendous mindset shift, and that allows you to almost celebrate your problems, because problems are persistent throughout life. You cannot live without problems. The only people that don't have problems are dead people. You're always going to have a problem. And something that I discovered while I was doing research for the book is that our brains, actually, the human brain seeks out problems. Our brains are the most sophisticated brains on the planet compared to all other animals. And we have the large prefrontal cortex that's responsible for problem solving. And we actually get pleasure from problem solving, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
This is why, for example, we like watching a dramatic movie or some kind of suspenseful film, because your brain is constantly trying to figure out who the bad guy is during the movie, and you're actually getting pleasure from that. This is also why we like solving puzzles, for example. So our brains actually seek out problems, and if there are no problems, we'll actually create problems. For example, sometimes, a couple, maybe your spouse is bored and all of a sudden starts to fight with you, because so once you understand this, you can be a little bit more selective about the problems that you seek out. And I think that's a tremendously powerful mindset shift. And of course, the problems that happen to us, we can be almost grateful for the problems that happen to us. Let's say a hurricane comes, and destroys my house. Of course, that's a catastrophic event. And I'm not trying to minimize any single problem, big or small. But as long as you're alive to complain about a problem, you have an opportunity to be grateful. And, and then kind of take on that problem and try to fix it.
Absolutely. That's a very something about the Bible, which we'll get into more later. But all of God's friends, the people that God considers his friends, are the people that not a lot of good things happen to them. It's a lot of adversity and overcoming adversity, and willingly taking on adversity. The willingness to do that. That's like a recurring theme. And I definitely think that's true, that there is a lot more joy in overcoming something difficult, like a puzzle gives you a lot of fulfillment. Whereas it seems like people who are very stagnant, all they do is play video games all day or something like that. They're also very stressed out and they're not happy.
Well, I think video games have a lot of problem solving embedded in them, but I think that kind of maybe ties it into Tony Robbins's definition, which is you're progressing at solving a problem, and that gives you pleasure. And I think it's just like, it's so powerful to recognize that our brains actually receive pleasure from solving problems. Maybe not pleasure from having the problem, it's pleasure from solving the problem. And again, once you have that mindset shift, it's just so powerful, because problems are endless. They're absolutely, you're never going to be without problems. And if you're truly, some of the smartest individuals, like I said, they seek out problems. They start companies to try to solve problems, or they go into politics to try to solve societal problems. And it's certainly a sign of intelligence.
Yeah. I definitely not knocking video games. But what I mean is, that's a bad example. What I mean is stagnant.
But I know what you mean about it. Yeah, exactly. If you're just like, if you're trying to avoid problems your whole life, I mean, first of all, that's impossible.
Right.
But I can definitely see a correlation with people that are, like
Mm.
I said, they're just trying to avoid problems, and that causes you to, I guess, not progress as much.
Yeah. Not progress. Right. Right. Not progressing as a person. And there's no fulfillment. Like
Hmm.
if you're not accomplishing anything, then you're not really. So there's a lot to be said about the journey. And I think it's an interesting thing you said, um, where no matter how much you achieve, you're going to have problems. So
Hmm.
the journey never really ends, even if you become retired and you've done the bulk of the work in your life, you kind of front loaded your life that way, you're still going to have lots of problems. You're never going to get away from it. So,
Yeah, exactly. You're going to manage your retirement account, right? I mean,
yeah.
again, and it's just like, problems are absolutely endless from the moment that you're born and you're trying to learn how to talk and walk and you fall down all the way to the rest of your life. There's always going to be something, whether it's external or something that you created yourself, some kind of problem that you're kind of seeking out. And yeah, you show me a person that has no problems, that person is dead.
Well said.
Yeah,
So, your podcast is called Contemporary Happiness.
that's right.
How does that contrast traditional happiness?
So I think it's very interesting that the concept of happiness is obviously subjective to everybody, right? What makes me happy may not necessarily make you happy, and I think that's totally fine. But I think for in contemporary times, in today's world, we're well advised to consider the contemporary developments in society around us to seek out happiness. I'll give you a good example. Um, you know, 300 years ago, if you and I are single men and we don't know how to cook, most people would say you should get a wife or get married because the woman is going to cook for you. And if you don't have someone that can cook for you, you will literally starve to death. Right. So I think obviously you don't want to starve. So having a full stomach is related to happiness. And the best way to have a full stomach 200 years ago was to be married so that someone can be in the household and cook for you. But now you can go on YouTube and learn how to cook. You can order Postmates or Uber Eats and get food delivered. You don't have to have a wife to fulfill that stomach fullness, requirement to be happy. Same thing goes the other way around. Women 200 years ago, they were so susceptible to violence, as they're walking down the street, right? There's just like people would commit rape and murder like there's no tomorrow. So the best advice that you would give to a woman 200 years ago would be to get married so that you can have a quote unquote man with you, so that you can prevent, acts of violence against you as you're walking down the street. Well, today we live in a civilized society. There's cameras, there's the justice system, there's Krav Maga. There's a lot of things that you can do to not be the subject. I mean, people are just more civilized. So there's a lot of things that you can do as a woman to not be subject to violence as you're walking down the street. Same thing with elderly care, for example. The traditional happiness model is to have children so that they can care for you when you get older. And that's a reason that a lot of people still have children, which I think is an antiquated reason.
Mm.
Now there's senior living, right? Assistance and things like that.
Yeah.
So times have changed, and the definition or the path to happiness has certainly changed. There's no longer a lot of these kind of traditional ways of getting to happiness or having or living a happier life are not only inapplicable, but at the very least, they're not the only way to live a happier life.
Happiness is not one size fits all. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's we have this is the best time in human history to be alive. Yet we face very unique and new problems. This is a particularly hard time for young people in the dating world. It can be a hard time uh, to get an education and go into a field.
it it's just it's unprecedented. Humanity's never faced the problems we currently have. Do you have any advice for young people in the dating world trying to find a mate? Asking for a friend, you know?
Advice in the dating world. I think one of the most powerful mindset shifts that I've made that has really helped my personal dating has been, uh, I guess there's a couple, but one of the biggest ones is to release my concept of judgment. I don't judge anybody. I mean, you could tell me that you killed 12 people last night. I won't judge you. Okay. I may feel sorry for you. I may not want you in my house and
Sure.
if within my social circle, but I don't judge you. And that, I think that's another kind of distinction between traditional and contemporary happiness. We don't need the concept of judgment, which is based on morality, which is based on, you know, so and so does something quote unquote bad, and then we have to chastise them. We have to say that this person, you know, we have to basically outcast them and remove them from society and look at them negatively. We don't need to do that. There's judges out there whose job is literally to professionally judge other people, and you can release yourself from judgment. So if I'm dating someone and they told me they've slept with 100 people, let's say they slept with 100 people last month, okay, I don't care. I mean, I'm not going to judge them. And that kind of releasing myself from judgment has really been a tremendous benefit to my dating life. I mean, when I'm sitting there on a date, girls will tell me I don't feel judged around you. And that's been like, you know, I mean, I look the same and I kind of act the same or I go on the same exact first date, but it's been a month. I've had multiple girls tell me that I don't feel judged around you. And I think that's been a tremendously powerful mindset shift for me that has really helped my dating life. So I would recommend to everybody to read chapter 8 of my book, which is called No Judgment, and to adopt this philosophy of not judging yourself and not judging others. I don't even use the words good and bad anymore to describe behavior. I have my own personal preferences, and those are my preferences. For example, an example I like to use is that I really don't like the color orange. I just hate it. You know, I hate it when it comes to fashion. That includes like cars, furniture, and definitely clothing. Okay. So if you want to be my girlfriend and you wear a lot of orange, I'm going to break up with you. And there's no judgment, right? No one can judge somebody for wearing a certain color. It's just my pure preference. And I live my life based on my preferences, not on this arbitrary moral code that has had utility over the last 5,000 years. You needed "thou shalt not kill" 5,000 years ago, so people literally stopped killing other people and they stopped pillaging, you know, their neighbors and stealing and all that good stuff. But we don't need that religious moral code anymore. We have the criminal law that says "thou shalt not kill," and if you kill somebody, you are going to face repercussions. That's the reason why I don't kill people. The reason I don't kill people to go and get my next meal is because it's actually, I don't know why that happens, is because it's actually a lot easier for me to work for my food. And believe you me, that if I wasn't able to feed myself by working, then yeah, I would resort to killing and stealing to feed myself. But I don't, like, you know, like you tell me, like, you know, you see like a young child who has grown up in gang culture, for example, and is holding up liquor stores all day, every day. Again, I feel sorry for that person. I mean, how difficult must it be to go and subject yourself to incarceration, potential incarceration, obviously potential violence through retribution. If you go and hold up a liquor store, chances are that at some point you're going to get shot, you know, by the store owner, and obviously you're going to have you know, the society is going to look down upon you, so you're going to have reputational harm. So there's so much risk with holding up a liquor store. The last thing that person is concerned about is God. You know,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
this releasing yourself from judgment is probably one of the most powerful mindset shifts, and I think that'll improve your dating life. In addition, I think self-love, self-acceptance. But hold on, let me get the order right. Self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love. So that means self-awareness means you're not in denial. So let's say, for example, I have bad credit. Last thing I want to do is be in denial about that, right? So I have to be aware that I have bad credit. Then I have to accept that, okay, so this is my flaw. Nobody's perfect. Maybe I'm a really good looking guy. Maybe I'm a great dancer. Maybe, I'm a good cook. There's all these great qualities about me. And this is my one bad quality, right? Or maybe multiple bad qualities. One of them being I have bad credit. Hey, so what? I'm still a worthwhile person. I have self-worth. I accept that I have bad credit, and that takes you to self-love. And once you reach that place of self-love, no matter what your flaws are, I don't care if you're a felon, I don't care if you come from a broken family, you have bad credit, whatever you've done in your past, it's my advice to you is to abstain from negative self-talk, to obviously you want to improve yourself, and that's another principle that's everlasting in life, to always want to improve yourself. If you have $1 billion, you're going to want to improve that to $2 billion. So self-improvement is constant, but judging yourself, or like I said, to have self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love, that's another very powerful mindset shift that again has tremendously helped my love life.
Yes, I agree with all of that. If you focus on the negative, especially when you're doing reflection, you're going to manifest negativity. Whereas you focus on positivity, you will manifest positive change. I want to focus on this idea of judgment, because the way I look at judgment would be, and I get what you're saying, but I want to kind of define these things a little bit more thoroughly. So the way I would look at judgment is if a person is a known thief, I'm not going to want them in my house, which is to me a form of judgment. Now that's not me outside of myself looking down and saying that this person is a bad person, but I would say it's a sort of personal judgment, or maybe I'm not finding the right word for this.
Well, I think you're dancing around it, but I think what you want to replace is when the key word there is personal, and you want to say personal preference, right? Just like I have a personal preference to not have any orange colors in my house.
So in this example, it would be that I have a personal preference not to be stolen from.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
Some people might say, for example, like go back to the bad credit, right? Somebody has bad credit. Some people may not want someone with bad credit in their house, right? Or let's just say you have a daughter who's dating somebody, right? And you have two choices. This guy can either have bad credit or he can be a thief. I think it can go either way. Some parents would prefer somebody that is, they'll accept the thief, but they won't accept somebody with bad credit. And again, and who's to say, who's right or wrong?
That's an interesting family that is like, you can date a thief or maybe even a murderer, just as long as he's got good credit.
Right. Well, let's think about it this way. Let's think about somebody who's a felon, right? Someone who's a felon, but the question is, why are you a felon? Maybe they committed murder or some kind of violent act, okay? And certainly somebody wouldn't want that person in their house because of personal preferences and obvious reasons. But maybe somebody else is a felon because of white collar crime, right? Maybe they skimmed a little bit off the books, or kind of like Office Space, they created some kind of code that takes 1/4 of a penny from every transaction. A little bit more of a harmless crime, so to speak, if you want to think about it. I think that's a little bit more tolerable to some people. They can understand. So, where do you draw the line? And no matter where you decide to draw the line, you have to understand that is an arbitrary line that you've chosen yourself based on your own personal tolerance. And then when you look outside of yourself, then you can say, hey, look, this is my personal preference. And then you can draw the line wherever you want, all the way down to color choice, which I think is a ridiculous, I think is a good example, because, that just really drives home the point that you're not judging, but you're making decisions based on your own personal. I mean, a lot of people would actually prefer to have a thief in their house versus a Trump voter, for example, versus a Republican, right? Like some people are so
there are definitely people like that. Yeah.
exactly right. And again, I'm not gonna judge them based on that preference, right? But they're making the choice based on their personal preference, and hey, God be with you.
Mm.
That's terrific, But
Yeah.
don't go around and start, bad mouthing somebody, or even just to yourself that this person is bad. There's no good and bad when it comes to the way my dog makes decisions is based on his personal preference. When I give him a carrot, for example, he likes the carrot, he eats it. When I give him a slice of orange, he doesn't like the orange. He doesn't, he chooses not to eat that orange, or he smells dogs around the neighborhood. Some dogs he's really happy with, some dogs he just doesn't like. Like, it's just
Yeah.
he doesn't say that dog is bad, right?
Do
These
you?
are concepts that human beings have invented with the Ten Commandments to help society go from basically barbarianism to a civilized society. And I think there's been tremendous utility in morality over the last 5,000 years. But
Yeah.
now that we have criminal justice systems, we can absolutely suspend our own personal concepts of judgment. And I think that's one of the biggest lines between traditional happiness and contemporary happiness.
I have a couple of things to say about that. You make a lot of excellent points. I think it is interesting. Not everyone is fit to judge. Judging is, as you pointed out, actually a profession that you have to study. I think the problem with that is there does have to be a degree of faith with the legal system, with the government. And I use the term faith here because I think it is fitting. And I'm someone who lacks faith in the government and the legal system. I've seen it work well, and I've seen it be I think as Americans, we've all seen it be very corrupt also. So I'm not saying that this is a good thing. Maybe it's something I need to reflect on more, but I tend to be the kind of person who does take judgment into my own hands. But in a perfect world, this is a system that you should be able to trust, really. If you could trust it, then it's absolute. You could let go of a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I automate in my life. Even if judgment's not one of them, there's a bunch of things that I kind of just let someone else figure that out, like the sciences, for example. I know I'm not educated in those matters, so I let my superiors in that, people who
Right.
studied this and are knowledgeable about it. So are you someone that judges people on things that aren't good and bad? For example, that guy is an idiot. Like,
Right.
judge. Do you judge intelligence? Is it just a good and bad thing, or?
I mean, I might say somebody, I can maybe make a personal observation that, in my opinion, and I think that's another good phrase there, my opinion. In my opinion, that guy doesn't know so much about, fashion, for example. So, they wore white after Labor Day, for example, which is a fashion, don't. So, yeah, I make observations, but I certainly don't judge. And I hear you in terms of corruption in government, especially in other countries. I think we
Yeah.
have it pretty good considering compared to other
America,
countries.
yeah, America has it
Yeah.
definitely a lot better than most of the world, if not
Right.
all of it. So
Right. But I think if you look at trends over the last, again, like 50 years, over the last 100 years, compared to the prior 5,000 years, we're on a pretty good trend here in
sure.
terms of government accountability, democratic values. So I do have a belief in the judicial system, and if somebody, let's say if someone breaks into my house, a little bit different, but if somebody embezzles $100,000 out of my bank account, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to go chase them myself. I'm definitely going to call the cops, right? I'm going to help the judicial system to try to bring me recourse, right? To go and arrest that person, to go and take the cash and bring it back into my bank account, assuming it's still there. And, you know, yeah, I think that, again, in contemporary society, you're well advised to, you know, again, release yourself from the concept of judgment. If somebody does something you don't like, maybe you can take some kind of action against that. That's completely different. But again, I wouldn't call it good and bad. I don't use the words good or bad in almost any context to describe behavior. It's just behavior that I like versus behavior that I don't like.
I see. Um, that's interesting. I do look at things in good and bad, but I also understand that it's personal. So when I say it's good or bad, I think it goes with, if I were to say that's a good person, or a better example, that's a good song. I think
See, that's a great example.
I think
What
it
you're
goes
really
without saying that that's my opinion,
exactly
that it's not objective.
you're saying that I like that song.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So for me to judge things, it goes without saying that that's my opinion, because I'm a person and I don't know things. Like, absolutely, I'm not an authority on that. Right. So
Sure.
yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. And
Yeah, I think you can definitely judge behavior again according to your own personal preferences. But kind of going back to the dating world and what advice I have for people that are trying to improve their dating lives, I personally have heard from dates that I've been on that I don't feel judged by you, and I think that's opened up a lot of doors, or has really improved my relationships. And that's, if you're talking about your own, I mean, we're talking about these esoteric concepts, you know, and hypotheticals. But pragmatically, this Friday night, you could be on a date. And if you adopt this concept of lack of judgment, you're gonna have a lot more sex and love in your life.
I'll try this out. I'll take
Yeah.
the advice.
And I think it's powerful. You know, somebody will say, like, this person's not judging, but at the same time, they have a strong constitution. They're making decisions based on their own personal preferences. And I think it's kind of like two sides of the same coin, and they will both increase your attractiveness.
I see.
Yeah.
I lost my point. I had something else for that.
We're talking about dating. You're gonna have more sex and love in your life.
What was I gonna say? Oh, back to judgment. I'm under the impression, and this is informed by psychedelic experiences, and also it just makes logical sense to me. Outside of personal experience, it also just makes sense to me that we are all the same person. The soul that is me is identical to the soul that is you, and what makes you and I different is things we go through in life and our biology, like what your parents bring to the table. But I think the soul is kind of and we can get away from that word, but every person is kind of a blank slate. I don't think there's anything intrinsically unique about the individual, I suppose, except for life experience and biology. So I definitely love and agree with what you're saying about you cannot judge what someone does out of desperation. If someone were a thief or a murderer, you have not been in that person's shoes, and I'm of the opinion that you absolutely would do what that person did if you were in the exact same situation, because in my opinion, you are that person. Not only this, but I think every major religion in the world espouses this idea. But the problem is, in contemporary religion, in organized religion, people don't actually understand the religious text. I'll speak on Christianity because that's my background. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And I can say at least about Christians, in large, most of them don't understand the Bible. They don't know what they're talking about. They misinterpret it, whether for their own means or because they've been misinformed. There's sort of this Organized religion has a man on a podium that dictates to you what the Bible says. Whereas that's not really, it's supposed to be a very personal thing. It's what your relationship with this text, your relationship with God.
Mhm.
And it gets very dogmatic where this is the only, that's where doctrine comes in, is this is our doctrine. This is how we interpret it. And there's no debating with a doctrine. You're either in or
Mhm.
you're out.
Right.
So it becomes very dogmatic. And all of that to say, I think what Jesus's point he was making when he says, I am the Son of God, is he is saying that I am God and I'm aware of it. He's
Mhm.
describing the concept I'm describing, where and when he says treat other people the way you would like to be treated, if you understand that everyone is the same person, it's kind of the
Mhm.
obvious step to treat people the way you would like to be treated, because that is you, or it
Mhm.
or in some regard. So I take this. I have, like I said, I have my personal judgments, even if it's something as trivial as, we'll cast away judgment. I have my personal preferences
There you go.
over music, over clothing and art, but
Exactly.
but I think it is a beautiful thing to not judge another person for their actions, because you would do the exact same thing if you
Yeah.
were in that situation.
Well, let's even think. I talked about this in my book in chapter 8, which is, let's just say somebody is a thief because they just like it. They don't need the money, but they enjoy doing it. Or even worse, they're a murderer because they enjoy doing it. Again, I feel bad for that person that they get their kicks off through that kind of nefarious activity that brings so much harm to other people. And also, again, it's a risky activity for yourself to engage in that kind of conduct. So I still don't judge them. I feel sorry for them that they've fallen into this, again, that whether they enjoy it or they're doing it out of necessity, it makes no difference to me. It just, because I'll still won't judge them, but I can feel sorry for them. I can still draw the same boundaries around, my own personal life. And to your point, in terms of we're all the same soul, this is actually coming up in my other book, my new book that I'm working on right now, which talks more on macro issues and societal issues. And in a chapter where I discuss race, um, I have a great line, which is, we all piss the same color. So, like, yeah, we are all human beings, and there's not that much difference between us, like you said, except for some small biological traits, and of course some environmental upbringing that creates some differences. But yeah, if you look at like body language experts, for example, when they're analyzing body language, they don't look at race. When somebody shrugs their shoulders, like, this is like the universal, I don't know. Like, I don't care where you're from. For some reason, people do this to show that I don't know. Right. So, and I think there's so much universality when it comes to a lot of human behavior. And yeah, I mean, no race, no color. But religion, as a lawyer, and I've looked at, I really analyzed happiness and of course everything that I talk about in the book, including judgment and where this comes from, right? It obviously comes from the Ten Commandments. And you gotta just, like, I don't believe that the Ten Commandments came from God. I don't believe in an old man in the sky. Okay. And you have to really understand my I guess thesis or hypothesis on how religion was invented. It was literally invented by people, and
Of
it was
course.
invented because they had to get around. They sat under a tree and they're like, look, Ishmael every day is going and stealing from his neighbor, or when he sees a woman that he likes to have sex with, he just goes and has sex. So we need certain rules here, like thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Okay. And what that enabled us to do is to really literally make the jump from barbarism to civilization. And so I have a lot of respect for religion in terms of what it's done for human civilization over the last 5,000 years. But now I look at religion, from whatever text it comes from, as just a set of guidelines. It's a set of guidelines. There's a historical text there. In fact, in my chapter on diet, I highly advocate on what I call the biblical diet, which is I take my foods from biblical texts, and that's how, like, that's the primary source of, you know, where I basically pick and eat food, you know. But I don't need thou shalt not kill or thou still, and again, and all the judgment that goes with that to govern my life, because now I have my own personal preferences and I live in a society where we're all governed by a social contract, which is the laws around in our communities that govern our behavior. So I don't need to, you know, rely on religion. And I don't even thank God anymore. I thank me. You know, there is no God. And I think religion, somebody told me this, you know, it wasn't during a psychedelic experience, but we're smoking a little weed. And this was 20 plus years ago, where someone said religion was invented to control people. And I thought that was a kind of a negative way of putting it, but it definitely was. It was invented to help people, again, stop people from pillaging their neighbors and stealing and whatnot, stop lying, for example, so that we can live in a more civilized society. So, you know, again, it had that utility, but in contemporary times, that utility is no longer as useful. That, you know, that concept is no longer as useful. And I think everyone's well advised to pick and choose from religious texts as it's a historical work. It's certainly not a divine work, and it's certainly not absolute. And the concept of morality is completely invented by human beings.
Sure. I do think it is, it's a beautiful thing that the Constitution outlines your freedoms, not restrictions, right? It outlines your God-given rights as it's laid out in the, actually, is you would know better than I would. Is it God-given rights, or is it just the way those are laid out?
They talk about inalienable rights, which is everyone is born with a certain, you know, I guess, intrinsic rights. Well,
Okay.
call it whatever you want. In fact, the word God, I think, actually doesn't appear in the Constitution, and it only appears one time in the Declaration of Independence. And the reason that I am, you know, I think the meaning of life, people ask this a little bit, maybe this is one of your later questions, which is, what is the meaning of life? In my opinion, the meaning of life is happiness. And one of the reasons that I kind of reached that conclusion is through deductive reasoning. It can't be money. It can't be family. It can't even be doing good for others, you know? And when you look at the Declaration of Independence, I mean, those guys, pretty smart guys, highly philosophical, and those guys, the founding fathers, literally invented freedom. And, you know, more power to them. And in the Declaration, they say, you know, everyone is entitled to life, liberty, which is freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. They didn't say the pursuit of, you know, wealth and family and doing social good. So I put a lot of credence in that, and that's why I think that the meaning of life is happiness. The meaning of your life should be happiness. And yeah, God is not. I know that, you know, society would for the most part fall apart if everybody, you know, if this got out essentially, and everyone started to believe that there's no God. And a lot of people say, you know, if you spread this message, there's going to be moral decay. But that is the truth. That there is, like, you know, there's certainly no old man in the sky. And even when you look at the Constitution and some of those texts for the founding fathers, which were obviously created thousands of years after the religious text, God, you know, it's on our money and stuff like that. And, you know, our politicians refer to God a lot. Obviously, God bless America and whatnot. But
not actually, you know, Constitution. Okay.
Anybody, and if you go kill 10 people and then go to court and say God told me to do it, you get laughed out of court. Right. And it's crazy because you can talk to the most religious person. You can go to a pastor, go steal $1 million from him. He'll sue you. And then your defense in court is God told me to do it. The pastor will say, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you know, so, you know, like,
I understand.
when it comes down to it, when the rubber meets the road, all of a sudden God's not really there.
It does seem to me that religion is almost a archaic form of government. It's government before, especially when we're talking
judicial system,
especially if we're talking about a tribe like Israel. It's more like the way of life for these people, which I think is actually what you're saying is very interesting, because ancient Israelites didn't necessarily believe in a man in the clouds either. It was like
Mhm.
the tetragrammaton, YHVH, is just the letters for earth, water, air, fire. It's an understanding of how things work. There are only a
Right.
couple of instances in the Torah where God is a character, most notably Job, right? That's going to be the go-to example of when God is a character, when he's talking to Hasatan, the accuser. They're having this conversation back and forth.
Mhm.
But most Israelites understood these things as parable, as something you tell your children to get them to behave. Um,
Exactly.
and it's only very recently that people, in like the last 500 years, it's a very recent amount of time that people have started to take these things literally. It's fascinating to me. Um, mo these
Maybe, I mean,
these are
it sounds like
contentious
you,
things to talk about with Christians specifically. They don't like to hear this, but
I understand. I mean, a lot of people get, you know, get a little bit, they get taken aback when you start talking about that God doesn't exist. But I think something that I'm kind of coming to the conclusion of, and I don't put myself out there as a religious expert, but every Passover, and Passover is coming up, it's going to be in late April this year. I watched The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston.
yeah,
It's a terrific film. It's three
yeah,
hours long, and God is a major character in that film, of course, when he spawns the Ten Commandments to Moses. And one of the universal themes that I'm just finding, at least from the movie, which I think is relatively, they try to be relatively, you know, religiously accurate, is the word achad in Hebrew, which means one. And it really goes down to like God is within you, like you are God, you know, this concept of
yeah.
God. I mean, I think one of the main things for the Israelites and Hebrew and Jewish people is that we don't idolize man-made stuff, right? Like a golden cow, for example. We don't, so that's why, and I think that was a huge kind of line in the sand in terms of not idolizing man-made creations,
That's
and
actually in
therefore
the
man,
Ten Commandments, I believe. Yeah,
right, and that, yeah, exactly, and then and essentially, I guess you idolize the concept of God, but since we, you know, mature, sophisticated people understand there is no old man in the sky, the only place God can really be is therefore within. Yeah. So then that's why when I go to sleep at night and I'm praying, and I do pray because I do think there's a scientific result from praying, which is basically affirmations, right? When you say, "Dear God, please, you know, give me $1 million," you're basically saying affirmations. So, but I think and the reason I try to tell people to pray to themselves and replace the word God with yourself is because I want to put the power in your hands,
mm,
not this fictitious old man in the sky, so that people are just walking around hoping for God to do something. And I think you become more powerless that way. And
sure.
again, had utility back in the day, but now I can't find a good reason why you would use the word God. I think it's more powerful and more empowering to pray to yourself and to have that kind of, you know, conversation with yourself and to thank yourself. Instead of saying thank God for this food, for this hot food with a plate of food in front of me, I say thank me. And I think that makes sense. I mean, who's more responsible for the food that's in front of me? That, you know, it's probably, I'm probably the most responsible person, you know, that has caused the food to come in front of me. So you know, I'm not doing it in terms of being some kind of, to just like, I'm not trying to be blasphemous just to be you know, dramatic and contrarian. I think there's utility in releasing yourself from the belief of God and to put that belief in yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. I think there's a lot of beautiful things. For example, in the New Testament, I think there's a lot of beautiful concepts in there, but it is absolutely a great thing for Roman nobles to give to poor people to make them more subjugated and not follow themselves. It's
Yeah.
a good friend of mine calls it the Roman control manual, which I think is it's this
There you
is
go.
this is what most, if not all, religions do. It actually takes away your agency.
Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful thing that you're waking people up to this idea of autonomy, that you are in control of your actions, and you're in control of your fate. And it is that is an
And your
important thing.
preferences, right? Going
Yeah,
back to the preferences discussion.
yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting talking to you because we disagree and differ about a few things, but I love getting opposing viewpoints to mine. One example of this is I think there is more to the meaning of life than happiness, but then again, I might be wrong. So it's interesting talking to you about it.
I
Um,
mean, you give me a better meaning, and I'm
sure,
all ears.
sure. I think
Cheers.
what cheers. Um, Happiness is a great thing, but I think there is also a certain responsibility with being alive, and part of that responsibility is to live it to the fullest, to have as much happiness as you can. But it also
Right.
comes with a certain amount of responsibility towards others and towards the earth itself. Um, to be alive is a great honor and privilege, whether that comes from something divine or whether from happenstance. Either way, it is a great responsibility to be alive. And I think we all have to have a certain level of accountability. Not to say that you don't. All that is to say that I think there is more than happiness. Because, for example, to raise a child is, I'm sure that's, I don't have children, but I'm sure
Hmm.
that's the most happiness that you could, when you talk to a parent, that is the most happiness they've ever achieved, is
Hmm.
to have done this thing. But there's also a great deal of sacrifice involved. You're
Hmm.
sacrificing momentary happiness for this greater good. So maybe you could philosophize that in the end it still ends up in happiness, but there is
Hmm.
still this component of you have to nurture and take care of the people around you and the world around you. um,
I don't disagree. I think that there's definitely, like, I mean, we live in a society, there's a social contract. And I think that it's noble to care for your community and to care for the world. And that's kind of why I'm doing this, right? To kind of try to help people, to help other people. I think I'm pretty much well versed in happiness and I'm living my own happy life. So I'm totally with you. And I actually get joy from helping other people. So, but if we're talking about the meaning of life in terms of a singular thing that you should go after, right? To
hmm,
the, at the expense of everything else, I would, if I had to pick one, I'd pick
sure.
happiness above
Yeah.
all. But yes, other responsibilities come after that. And I think everyone can walk and chew gum at the same time and pursue their own personal happiness while also not being an asshole, in society. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, if you're not personally happy, who cares about the world? Who cares about global warming? If we have 8 billion people on Earth right now that are unhappy, and that our goal is to get to 10 billion or 15 billion and continue to procreate unhappy people. I don't know. I think there's better to have 4 billion happy people on Earth rather than 20 billion unhappy people. But so these are macro issues, and I'm really all about, like, you personally sitting right there, and I would say, hey, do what makes you happy.
Hmm.
If wearing flannel shirts makes you happy, and I wear a lot of flannel myself, wear flannel. Like, now again, if flannel is something that is not good for the environment, then make some choices. There's some choices to be made there, but at the end of the day, I, if I was your personal happiness coach, I'd tell you to do what makes you happy. Who
Yeah.
cares about the environment? I'm here to help you be happy, and then we can figure out those things later.
You
You know,
make a good point, and to kind of echo a little bit what you're saying too, not only on the macro scale of take care of the earth, but on a personal scale too. A mistake I've made in relationships in the past is caring for the other person's needs above my own, which is never
hmm
going to last, right? You have to take care of, I mean, even if you're a parent.
Yeah,
If,
you got to be happy first.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
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 If
Going
if
back to
you
the,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, if you're a parent and you drop dead from not eating because you've been feeding your child, well, now your child's gonna go hungry too because you weren't there to provide for them.
Exactly, exactly. And going back to the parenting thing, the parenting is certainly a very happy phenomena. But and I don't have kids either. And I just did a I just did a podcast on how real parenting really begins at 18 and not birth, because you see all these quote unquote happy parents during the early stages of their child's life, and they're on cloud nine. They're tremendously happy from the moment the child is born, right until like the teen years. They're happy as can be. But something that I've discovered is that our brains are actually wired to feel endorphins when we see a child being born. And the reason kids are so cute is literally a defense mechanism so we don't kill them and that the human race can survive, because kids are a nightmare. There's a lot of sacrifice to be made. And that's why we've actually evolved, and we have evolved this endorphin release that comes with parenting a young child, because that offsets all the sacrifice. And if it wasn't for the endorphins that we feel when we see our kids taking their first step, being born, doing all these cute things, goo goo gaga, we would literally kill the child, because it's a difficult task. And I'm here to tell
Yeah.
anybody who is thinking about parenting, the number one word that I want to hear from anybody who wants to take on parenting is sacrifice.
Mm.
Sacrifice. A lot of people say, I want to have baby. I want to have a child. They don't say, I want an 18-year-old person in my life. That's what children become. They become 18-year-olds with their own problems, with their own philosophies, with talking back to you and everything. And when you go on Instagram and you see all these pictures of newborns and babies and their first day of school, I'm sure your feed is full of it. My feed certainly is. My friends are reaching that age. I mean, the parents are just so happy. What I don't see is somebody posting a picture of their 25-year-old child, having done something.
Yeah.
Like the newness wears off.
Yeah.
And
They're not as cute anymore.
yeah. And don't tell me about the world is not going to survive if everyone listens to this advice, because we've literally gone from 1 billion people 200 years ago to now 8 billion people. The world was just fine when it was 1 billion people. So, take caution, be cautious about your decision to become a parent.
It's a serious responsibility.
It serves responsibility. And yes, you will feel happiness, but know that happiness is wired into your brain. I felt very, very happy because I went on a hot date last night and had some great sex. Or I feel happy when I listen to music and went to a concert and watched some Guns N' Roses front row. Who's to say who felt happier, right? We're not here to compete. So there's a lot of ways that you can feel happy, like we talked about early in the podcast, which is to solve problems. And of course, raising a child is one of the biggest problems that you can solve for. So, I think people are misguided by thinking that children bring happiness, or why you feel happy for having children. And I'm just trying to help people be very judicious about their decision to have children, because I've seen a lot of people that have children 5 years later, that luster is gone. Some people, of course, are fantastic parents and they stay happy throughout the child's life, but some people don't. The novelty wears off, and then you got divorce, you got alimony, you got child custody problems, divorce lawyers. Some of my divorce lawyer friends are some of the richest attorneys I know. So I'm just trying to help save people from making these lifelong decisions. You can get married and divorced all day. Those are called legal contracts. But once you have a child, that's a blood contract.
Yep. Yeah.
So just wanted to get that out there real quick.
No, I totally agree with you. Don't do it if you're not going to take it seriously, because it's the most serious thing you could do, right?
Exactly. And don't tell me who's going to care for you when you get older. Again, there's senior living assistance programs. Some people say, don't you want to have children? Don't you want to know what your kids look like? I'm like, you want to know what my kids will look like? Go look at my cousins. Yeah. That's exactly what my kids will look like.
Also, there's an app for this. I can just boop, boop, boop. Here's what my kid will look like.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're friends with Jasmine. If I had a daughter, pretty good chance Jasmine and her would be highly, like, they would resemble each other.
There'd be a lot
Very
of
close.
genetic similarity. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have a lot of cousins. When you put them all in a room, you see the similarities there. Like, so these are again antiquated reasons that I don't think necessarily apply in contemporary society for reasons to have children. And I'm a big proponent of, if you really, really want to have children, especially like, women that are listening to this right now, they might say, but my biological clock is ticking and I want to have kids. And I get that you're under a time pressure. In fact, I have another video on that, which is that you're literally under duress because you're facing a deadline. And
That's
then
a
that's the
real
worst
thing.
time to be making, that's the worst time to be making decisions. But I'm a
Yeah.
huge proponent of adoption. And I think that everyone should consider adopting. There's a lot of kids out there that are basically parentless because parents didn't make a right choice. They could really use somebody who wants to dedicate their lives to, helping young people, grow up well. So again, I'm a huge proponent of adoption. I think that releases everyone from the pressure to have children by a certain date. And yeah, so that's kind of my philosophy on kids.
I totally agree with you. Sometimes having children is it's a selfish decision where it's like,
Absolutely.
I just want this thing, where it's like, well, if you really want to like help the world, like there's plenty
Yeah.
of kids that need a home.
Absolutely. I think having children is one of the most selfish things. And if you're having
Yeah.
children, you fall into one of two categories. You're either selfish and in denial, or you're just selfish. Of course, it's much worse to be selfish and in denial. I want to see somebody come and tell me, I want to have kids. Yeah, I'm being selfish. I want to pass on my genes, and stuff like that. Those are good answers to why you want to have children, But if you think that it's a selfless decision, or again, I think that a lot of people are being selfish and they're also in denial.
Yeah.
So that's really bad,
Yeah.
And I would run for the hills if I'm having that conversation on a date.
I want to get back to your book here in a second, and I don't want to take this tangent too far because we've
Sure.
already talked about children quite a bit. But there are theories about why there are decreases in birth rates, which I think the reason is we have other avenues of happiness. Whereas if you're a peasant, there's not really a lot else to do, right? So, I will say this: the smaller amount of people there are, the more easily controlled they'll be. Whereas if you have a very large population, that's going to be a more unruly, and you're going to have less influence over a large group of people on some things, at least. There are actually examples where like mentalists and sleight of hand artists will tell you it's actually easier to manipulate a group of people than it is to trick an individual, in a one-on-one interaction. So there are exceptions to that too. But I have a lot of radical ideas about the world and government specifically. We won't get into that too much. I want to get back to your book. You outlined 5 different types of capital. Can you kind of outline those here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this came from a great course I took at UCLA. I think it was called Intellectual History. And the whole thesis of the course of the class was the 4 types of capital, which is intellectual capital, social capital, cultural capital, and financial capital. So a lot of people equate wealth with just financial capital, but you have all these other types of capital at your disposal. And I've added a 5th one personally, which is personal capital. So basically, let's just say you have 0 money in your bank account. So you have 0 financial capital, but you're best friends with Elon Musk. Well, guess what? Because that means you have high social capital, and you can use your social network to get a job. So you can actually you can increase your financial capital through an increase in social capital. Or let's say you're the smartest person in the world, but you have 0 financial capital. Well, you can use your intellect to make money. And therefore, so these types of capital really all work together to help increase your wealth. And a lot of people have this kind of singular vision of equating wealth with financial capital. So I'm here to tell anybody, who has low financial capital to focus on their other types of capital that are at their disposal, which is again, social capital, intellectual capital. Cultural capital means your ability to adapt, your ability to read the room, so to speak, your ability to be able to fit into multiple environments. And that's another tremendous, trait to have that can really help your capital and your wealth.
Kind of synonymous with charisma a little bit.
Charisma, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the ability to work the room. But what's really cool about personal capital is how much you are aware of yourself, how much you accept yourself, and how much you love yourself. Self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love. And I'm here to tell you that everybody who is seeking out all those other types of capital, they're doing it to get to personal capital. So if you're the person that has, let's say, no friends, you're dumb and you're broke, but you love yourself, you're already at the place that Puff Daddy, Taylor Swift, Elon Musk, and all the wealthy people that you think are quote unquote wealthy are trying to get to. Everyone's trying to increase their financial capital so that they can actually accept themselves and love themselves and be at a place where they have self-acceptance, self-awareness, and self-love. So, focus on wealth through those 5 lenses, 5 different types of capital, and put personal capital on a pedestal, because that is the best type of capital to have.
Well said. I think that's a beautiful outlook on life. Some people that most would consider unsuccessful, because you're right, people do look at it through a lens of financial wealth. But some of those people would love to be in the position of the person who just loves themselves and practices self-love. That's a beautiful thing. I think that's also, you kind of have to have this relationship with yourself before you can have a relationship with anyone else. That's where it starts, is with you. And that's what we were talked about earlier, whether it's a relationship, whether it's raising a child, or it's making a difference in the macro scale. It all starts with personal happiness. I agree with you.
Exactly. Yeah, and self-love, absolutely. In fact, somebody who doesn't have self-love is incapable of love. That's one of the major red flags that I look for on a date, or if somebody that I want to get romantically involved in. If they lack self-love, this person, is definitely not going to be able to love me. That's for sure. Or their child. Now, again, there's all this kind of la-di-da early days when they have a child and they feel happy and stuff like that. But when push comes to shove and that child becomes 18 years old, that's when you see a lot of divorces happening. All of a sudden, like, this person is incapable of love. And again, you don't love yourself. And one of the best ways to find out if someone loves themselves, ask them. They're like, hey, do you love yourself? And see how they respond. If they don't respond with an enthusiastic yes, they're telling you.
Yeah.
And I think you should be very, very cautious about, engaging in love with that person, because they're literally not capable of loving you, because they don't have the prerequisite to give love, which is self-love. It's absolutely impossible. It's a facade. It's a song and dance. Like, you got to look for that self-love. I talk about it a lot in my book. Use my book. There's other places where you can try to learn what self-love is, so you can detect for self-love. Once you know it, once you know how to look for it, it'll be pretty apparent to you. It'll just kind of, completely stand out. And it's like a really great filter to use in your personal relationships, in your romantic relationships, because you're in for a world of hurt if you're trying to get love from somebody who doesn't love themselves.
Yeah, well said. This is something I ask everybody, David. So no one knows the answer to this question. There's a lot of people that feel very confident about it, and I think that's fine, but no one knows. What do you think happens after we die?
So Keanu Reeves was asked this question on one of the talk shows, and that his response really stuck with me, which is, what happens is that a lot of people that you love will grieve.
Fuck.
That's
Yeah,
it.
that's
That's it.
that hits so
Like,
hard. Yeah.
nothing will happen to you. Like, there's
Mhm.
no afterlife. And again, heaven, again, this concept was created to control people. Be good, be good because you're gonna go to heaven.
It's a
Don't be
reward
bad
system.
because you'll go to hell. Exactly. Like nothing. You know how I know that? When I step on an ant, nothing happens to that ant except that there's now I gotta wipe it off my shoe. You know,
That's
and
a
what's makes different from any other animal?
that's a hard thing to argue with. There's no evidence that anything happens after death, and people who've had near-death experiences, flatlining and coming back, don't. I would say I don't actually know the numbers on this, but I would say on average, don't report anything except darkness.
Well,
So
first of all, they've had near-death experiences. That's
sure,
not death. So
yeah,
that's a tremendous distinction there, and it's
sure.
easy to say like they're near death. Sometimes
Some people have been
I've,
clinically
I've
dead, but they've been resuscitated, right? So
again, that's not death.
it's close to
Like
death. Yeah,
I know, and you see, you're putting conditions: near death, clinically death,
sure.
close to death. None of those are
That's
dead.
that's why I say
Dead.
nobody knows, because
Right. They can't.
none of us have experienced that. And
Exactly.
what you're saying does make sense to me, from a logical point of view. That well, there's no evidence for it, so why would there be? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a good answer. The best answer I've ever heard to this question, because I ask everybody this,
Mhm.
um, is it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
it shouldn't affect your day to day at all, and
Yeah. Exactly.
that's
And
my favorite answer. Although that Keanu Reeves answer is also very good. I love
I
that.
mean, that's the practical answer, which is
Yeah.
that people around you will grieve, but for all you're concerned, I had a friend whose wife died on the operating table. So, and I think something that stuck with me is that he said she doesn't even know she's dead because she was unconscious when it happened. you know, so like I think that's a
Yeah.
great point. And I'll tell you, death is actually a blessing because without death, then you wouldn't be able to cherish life,
Oh
you
yeah.
know.
Memento
And
mori. Remember that
yeah,
you will die. Yeah.
and I think that's the way I look at it. It's truly a blessing, and I'm not saying that I want to die. I just know that I'm going to, and that drives me to live life to the fullest, to pursue happiness as much as I can, because you know because
It's what
I'm here. Why? What else am I gonna do? Like what else? Like I think that's the most worthwhile expenditure of my time. So
it's what gives life meaning.
yeah,
Um,
I guess
this is
exactly.
something that's explored a lot in like vampire fiction, is that
Hmm.
everything's very dull because there's very little consequence and there's
Sure.
no urgency.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think it's once you kind of have that realization. Like when we're younger, when you're in your teens or 20s, I think it's hard to conceptualize that. But obviously, as people get older, people around them start dying. You have a little bit more experience with death. Then, if you're lucky, you'll have this wake up call, and then and I think that'll drive you to really live life to the fullest. As cliche as that sounds, yeah, and like take a moment, like stare into your child's eyes, stare into your loved one's eyes, tell them you love them, and just like really just like I'm really enjoying having this conversation with you right now. I think it's
likewise.
like terrific, and I think we're doing something good for people that are
Yes.
listening,
Yeah.
and like that gives me pleasure, and I'm cherishing the moment, and I guess you're just being more present, which is the title of chapter 9 in my book. And this is, I'll tell you, this is a spoiler alert, like so you don't have to read it. In fact, chapter 9 was going to be a one-word chapter. And the title of chapter 9 is The Best and Shortest Advice I've Ever Received. And this is true. And that advice is be.
Mm. Yeah.
Be. In fact, I think when I revise the book and I make some changes, I bet I wrote a paragraph after it about like how great it is to be present. But I really think it's more emphatic if the chapter was just a one word, and in fact, it's the shortest word or the shortest sentence that you can construct in the English language. Just be, and that being present is just another one of life's gifts that a lot of people take for granted.
Yeah, because it's short, and if you're not paying attention, if you're not here, then you're missing out. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do what I do for very similar reasons to what you do. I think these kind of conversations, like we're talking about some serious stuff right now, and I don't think a lot of people are having these kind of conversations in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, especially young people.
Especially when it's an area of disagreement, people tend to get very confrontational. But you and I are both adults. We should be able to disagree about things, even strongly disagree about things, and still be able to get a beer afterwards, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And this
Like
is
you tell
this
me.
this is an issue
Yeah.
that maybe specifically, maybe not, but maybe specifically my generation has a problem with, is being able to allow differences, and especially in opinion, right?
But I think that goes back to the judgment, right? So like you could tell me, for example, I believe in the old man in the sky and I believe in the afterlife. Those are things that I vehemently disagree with. And I'd say, hey, more power to you, man. Like, you live your life. Now, am I going to have you come over to my house and lecture my cousins or my kids on that stuff? No, because I think it's a little bit of, I don't believe in it. I don't think it's good, good philosophy, with all due respect. And I'm not going to partake in it or engage in it, but I'm not going to judge you for it. And I can certainly tolerate you talking about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that, I think, today's society is a little bit allergic when it comes to opposing viewpoints.
Yeah.
But, that's how you're going to get, the best. That's how you're going to get the best, by getting a myriad of viewpoints, and then you can decide for yourself what resonates to you.
Absolutely. I think I don't believe in a man in clouds either. But like you, I have a deep respect and for what religion's done for humanity. It's how we got here, right? And I think this. Let me work this out with you, because this is something I'm still working out for myself. But I think people people serve something. We subjugate ourselves to things. It's why we have rulers, right? And I think in the absence of a figurehead, in the absence of a god or a king, a monarch, we will serve something, whether that's conscious or subconscious. So I think a lot of people, I'm going to use the word
like the devil. You're going to say like the devil. Yeah.
I was going to say like money, like a lot of people, right. And I am going to use the word worship because it is a strong word, but it's what I mean when I say this. I think a lot of people worship the pursuit of money.
Right.
And that's their God. And I think, so basically what I'm saying is, in the absence of an ideal to worship, people will worship something subconsciously. And what I've decided, knowing this, what I've decided to make my focal point, I like to call it my own holy trinity. I have the teacher, the student, and the knowledge itself. And you have to have all three. And it sounds to me, talking to you, that your God is happiness, the pursuit of happiness.
Well, that's what I'm serving, right? Exactly. Like you said, you even use the word serve interchangeably with pursuit. Like people will pursue money it's kind of a vacuum, so that somebody else will fill that void. So yeah, I think happiness is a good placeholder for that, so that you relinquish your worship of God and religion, and you really start to worship yourself and your own personal happiness. I think that's, to me, the most fulfilling, the most noble think that if everybody was really focusing on their own personal happiness and stop judging others and everything, then I think society as a whole will be better. But
Absolutely.
I think, you know, the whole societal stuff, and I'm about to write a book on macro happiness to help, you know, talk about more societal changes that we can make to improve the world, and I call it the path to world peace. But you know, I almost think that's just more, it's more philosophy, and this is real. Like you and I talking, and you, like, you know, getting off this call and thanking yourself for something, and that's real stuff. Like that's real, like endorphins, happiness, self-empowerment. Like that's something you can touch, you know.
Yeah.
Like, and like, you know, for me to like help, you know, the country of Africa, you know, get clean water, again, I think that's very noble. But those are just I don't know how to, I don't want to differentiate between it, but yeah, I think personal happiness, like that's really it, it should be the top, you know, objective and the top pursuit, and versus, you know, serving some god or pursuing some god. And then when you think about, like, you know, the devil, like the devil come in, right? For example, like, you know, what is the devil? Is it sex, drugs, and rock and roll, for example? Well, all those things are pretty great, you know, in my opinion. They can
Yeah.
definitely make you happy, especially, you know, obviously everything in moderation. But you know, they get, so don't worry about this, like this devil nobility stuff, because I think those are just synonymous with good and bad. And
Sure.
just yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you
I'm
so
going to hell. I'm going to hell for this conversation. Good thing doesn't exist.
much. I think these things exist in a metaphorical sense. They exist in our minds, which gives them some kind of tangibility. Uh, I play.
There's a utility. There's a,
Yeah,
like you said, the reward system, you
I've
know, and
had.
we need it. We needed
Yeah,
that.
anecdotally, I've had a lot of bizarre experiences in my life with Ouija boards, psychedelic drugs, um, that have gave me pause about my understanding of the universe. Um, I won't get into any of that right now because it's stuff. Alice has heard all that before, but I'm playing with this idea now that the idea of it being in your head or external, something external interacting with you, or just inside your mind. This might be the wrong way of looking at it, where it's actually neither or both, paradoxically so, and or something completely different than interior or exterior, beyond human comprehension. Um, but all that to say, I think ideas, the realm of imagination. Like I write fiction and I write poetry, and that for me, and I talk to a lot of artists about this. It comes to me. I receive it. I I I kind of
Mhm.
look at it like channeling, like I'm auto writing something, and um, whether that's a part of my subconscious or whether it's exterior is kind of irrelevant to me. Uh, it's
Yeah.
either neither or both. Either way, it doesn't matter. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, like when people talk about like the Big Bang Theory, you know, and like, you know, where did the how did the world start, and you know, was it divine, was it Adam and Eve, or was it, you know, a meteor that hit a rock, for example? My answer is who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? Like I understand that it's fun to philosophize,
Mhm.
and again, like more than fun, maybe, and like, you know, there's some utility in philosophizing, but when it comes to like how the world was created, like let's just get real. Like, you know, I don't care. Like I just really don't care. It's not going to impact me personally at all. Whichever one's the answer. Or maybe there's a third reason. You know, and when I hear the word like the universe and stuff like that, none of us are going to get off this rock, which we call Earth. So, like, you know, it's not like you have to understand that sometimes you're doing things because you just like doing it, like you like thinking about those things, and I think that's great. Again, that's your preference, that's great. But I'm not going to base life decisions on that. The same reason why I'm not going to base life decisions on religious text. Like this is my life here that we're talking about. Like I'm going to make a decision on whether or not to have a child or not, and I guess maybe going back to that distinction about macro versus micro, distinctions. Like I don't really care about like the decreasing birth rate in Japan. Like if I lived in Japan, they're
Oh yeah,
suffering from a decreasing birth rate.
yeah.
Like
South
okay,
Korea and America are
yeah,
right behind them. Yeah.
like and I get that, okay, and I get how that's a macro problem for some people, and you can even say, well, if this continues, then the Japanese culture is going to be erased. Well, first of all, like the Aztecs are no longer around, but their culture is still around, kind of. But the point is, like, you're talking, like, I'm trying to reach people at a personal level. You got 120 years on this earth to live, and these things, unless you're in a position of power, like in the government, to affect macro issues,
Hmm.
you're just your average Joe sitting at home. Like, let's don't like burn too many brain cells on how the earth was created. Like you can do it for fun as a source of, like you said, fiction, for example. But I think making major life decisions, that's what I'm really focused on. Who you're going to marry, right? Do they have self-love? Why you're trying to have kids? What is your perception of you? Like, do you have that self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love? Can you go to bed at night and pray to yourself so you can have that sense of empowerment because you're in charge? You're in charge of your life more than anybody else. These are the things that I think, are important to me, at least. I think I would advise anybody to put high importance on. What's going to happen to us after we die? Again, like, you really gotta, like, I'm more, as a lawyer, I'm a little bit more pragmatic.
You are
And
very pragmatic. I
you
appreciate that.
know, yeah, and if something's like, so yeah, good. But hey, it was really nice talking to you,
Yeah, absolutely, David.
and Alice too, and really appreciate her being on the call.
Alice, check out the Contemporary Happiness podcast and go pick up Good Problems to Have, The Anatomy of Contemporary Happiness. Thank you, David, for your time. Thank you, me, for facilitating the conversation. And thank you, Alice, for listening. We will see you next
Absolutely.
week.
Thank you all. Take care.